Now then, iron and steel are two sides of the same coin, and right now S&P is forecasting that the supply glut in the global steel market will persist for the remainder of 2025, with only a slight price recovery expected in 2026. At 50%, the tariffs in the United States have priced out many import sources. In the European Union, a combination of market safeguards and the imposition of the carbon border adjustment tax could help to support steel prices too. When I spoke to Peter Major, the Mining Director at Modern Corporate Solutions earlier today, I started our conversation by asking him if that supply glut will affect Timandu's commercial viability in the medium term.
Yeah, I think it does, but the government's been very firm about if companies are not producing here shortly, they're going to lose their license. And we've seen licenses in area have already been reduced. Government realizes, hey, we tie this up with one company, one consortium, and nothing happens for 10 or 20 years, and we miss out on a big iron boom. And we could have been producing a long time ago. So it's way, way overdue. We've known about this deposit for probably 100 years. There's been pretty serious talk about developing this for 40 years. But only now, literally the last 5, 6 years, we've seen a lot of money spent here. You know, Rios is in there. They're going to get this thing going because they can't afford to lose any more of the property than they already have. But are they going to make money on it? Probably not for a while. You know, it's huge capital expenditure. Building a railroad 1,000 kilometers, building a deep water port, you know, ship handling facilities, and it takes time and it takes billions. And that's why they've been dragging their feet, because they were able to satisfy world demand with their existing operations, but they didn't want to lose this to a possible competitor that would develop it. You know, it's always better to eat your own children than have somebody else eat them.
Are those the only reasons why it took so long to get this project to market? Because like you said, you know, they've been talking about this as far back as the 1970s. And yes, there's a massive amount of infrastructure investment that's required to get that ore, which is essentially in the western end of the country, and build the infrastructure, the 1,000 kilometers of rail line, the ports that need to be able to handle all of this iron ore going out. Was that the only reason why it took that much time to get it to market, or are there other factors?
Look, there's a lot of factors. You've got to remember, there was a pretty big commodity boom in the 1970s. And almost all of that came to an end by 1981. On the whole, most metal prices were falling throughout the world from 1981 until 2003. Now, that is 22 years of falling metal prices, certainly in real terms. And a lot of those metals hit all-time lows. Most of the base metals, certainly copper, all-time. That all-time means a 5,000-year low. Gold, I think it was the second lowest gold had ever been. You know, by 2000, 2001, 2002, that's the second lowest gold had ever been in real terms in the history of man. So nobody really wanted to invest in more production in the 80s and 90s because you were just helping slice your throat. You were just furthering the price decline in virtually every commodity. Okay, in the new millennium, why didn't they invest in the first 10 years? Probably nobody believed in a super cycle. Not enough to invest billions in. Few people did, but the majority of money was still very wary.
One last question for you, because by some estimates, output from the Simandou mine will go up to around 120 or so million metric tons of iron ore a year. How can Guinea avoid the same problem it has now with aluminium? It exports a lot of the ore, a lot of bauxite, but very little of the actual refined metal. What are the obstacles to domestic smelting? Is it an energy problem, or does it come back to that question that you've just posed there? You know, who's going to put in the capital to get this done?
Look, it is not that high tech to reduce iron ore to pig iron to steel, but it's huge capital. And why isn't Australia doing it? Why is Australia exporting 800 million tons of iron ore to China? Why aren't they going for the value add? Or why isn't Russia? Or why isn't South Africa? Because to reduce iron ore to pig iron and then reduce it again to steel, it takes huge capital expenditure. It takes huge amounts of electricity, and it's got to be reasonably low cost electricity. And then it's handling facilities. It's a lot easier handling iron ore and shipping it across the world than it is handling big flat iron, pig iron. So it's all about who's going to spend the money. Well, whoever's going to spend that money, they want to know they're going to get a return on that money. And right now, you can't see a return building a smelter when you can barely show a return getting the raw ore. That's where your highest profit margins are and your least volatility.